Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to AlphaBiolabs' latest breakfast webinar entitled Discover the Latest in Drug Testing for the Legal Sector. By way of introduction, my name's Andrew Priestley, and I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager for the legal sector at AlphaBiolabs. And I'm joined this morning by my two colleagues, Ashley Hodgkinson, who's our Sample Collections Manager, and Marie Davis, who's our Toxicology Reporting Manager. Now, we've got up to 45 minutes today for the webinar. So in terms of the agenda, we've broken it down into three sections. The first section is just really to open up the webinar. Myself will talk about the latest trends in types of drugs being used illegally in the UK. I'll then hand over to Ashley, who's going to talk about how we collect and test different sample types. And then Marie is going to talk about how to interpret our court-approved drug test reports. Our reports are designed to be user-friendly, but often we get feedback from yourselves as our clients to say, you could do with a bit more guidance in terms of the more sort of technical aspects of the report. So Marie is going to take you through that this morning. We'll then finish, as we always do, with a question and answer session. So please do use the Q&A function on the Zoom technology, which we're using this morning, to ask any question that you might have. Feed them through to us and I'll collate them, and then we can ask, we can go through those at the end. There's also a short post-webinar survey. So before you log off today, please do take a moment just to complete that. It will only take about a minute, but it gives us really useful feedback for the future planning of these webinars. Okay, so just to get things started. So I've looked into the latest trends in types of drugs being used illegally in the UK. And I came across this report from the Office for National Statistics entitled Drug Misuse in England and Wales. And this is a 12-month report for the year ending June 2022. So it's really for the period when we were coming out of the COVID pandemic. And if we look, there's 4 bullet points. So if we look at the first 3, I'll just read through those. So the report said that during that 12-month period, 9% of adults aged 16 to 59 and 19% aged 16 to 24 had used drugs in the previous 12 months. It also went on to say that 2.6% of adults aged 16 to 59 reported being frequent user of drugs. So in other words, they use them more than once a month in the past year. And it also said 7.4% and 16.2% of adults aged 16 to 59 and 16 to 24, respectively, had used cannabis in the previous 12 months. Now, what it also said was it compared those numbers to the previous report, which ended the year ending June 2020, so really before COVID, and it said there was no marked difference. So in terms of those sort of general usage rates, it was pretty much the same. However, if you look at the 4th bullet point, in the latest report, it said 3% of adults aged 16 to 59 and 5% of adults aged 16 to 24 used Class A drugs. But interestingly, that was down by approximately 20% on the pre-COVID period. So it's quite obvious that COVID did start to shape the sort of makeup of the landscape of drug usage in the UK. And this chart breaks it down by drug type. So, excuse me, you can see there, for example, with the Class A drugs such as powder cocaine, ecstasy, and LSD, that there was a decrease in usage in that COVID period. But what's also interesting is for the Class B and C drugs listed there, it actually went the other way. So, for example, with magic mushrooms and ketamine, anabolic steroids and new psychoactive substances, they actually saw a bit of an increase in usage during the COVID period. So whilst the report says the general levels of illegal drug use in the UK was maintained through COVID, the actual makeup of the different drugs being used absolutely changed. And we're seeing that more and more. I just wanted to mention a couple of new kids on the block here, which you might have heard of, you might not have done, but these are, there's increasing number of incidents of these two types of drugs being reported as being used in the UK. So pink cocaine, or Tootsie, as it's known, is actually an unbalanced mix of MDMA, ecstasy, or ketamine. It's obviously synthetically made, and it is increasingly prevalent in the club scene across Europe. Despite the name, it's got no relation to cocaine, but it is consumed in a pill or powder format. Effects include strong hallucinations, which can last for up to 8 hours. And it's often mixed with other drugs like fentanyl, which sadly can prove fatal. Another one, Calvin Klein, which has been around for a bit longer. Again, you might have heard of this. That is actually partly cocaine. So it's a mixture of cocaine and ketamine again, and it has a similar effect to ecstasy. It's been used on the US club scene for a while now, but it's increasingly being noticed in the UK, and sadly that can also be deadly. So these are like polydrugs, really, a combination of at least 2 different drug types, and I think that's what we're seeing more and more of as we come out of COVID, is an increased use in these types of drugs. So just wanted to mention, from our point of view, our standard drug panel can test for any of the 12 drugs that you can see listed there. But what we can also offer is our Drug Screen Plus service, which is a free service whereby, let's say, for example, you have a court order where you've asked us to test for cocaine. We can do that, but through Drug Screen Plus, we can actually also screen for any of the other 11 drugs listed on our standard panel. And let's say, for example, you did have a client who was using pink cocaine, then as well as testing for the cocaine, we would probably pick up in the testing an element of ecstasy and the ketamine. Now, the Drug Screen Plus service is free. We only charge if we identify any additional drugs. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. In addition, we can test for other drugs, including magic mushrooms, LSD, tramadol, steroids, and the newer psychoactive substances, including spice and GHB. And just to finish on my part, I just wanted to talk about the new psychoactive substances. So again, we're seeing an increasingly rate of usage of these types of substances in our country. And only recently, you can see on the slide there, the Home Office actually added 11 more NPSs to Class A of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. And I've listed them for you. You've probably not heard of most of them, if any at all, and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce them. But again, if you're interested in reading more about that, you can go to our website blog where we've got a more detailed article about it. But just, in terms of changing the landscape, these NPSs are something that we need to think more about. Okay, hopefully you found that useful as a bit of an icebreaker. I'm now going to hand over to Ashley, and she's going to talk about how we collect and test different sample types.
Hello, thank you for joining us. Before I hand over to Marie for the technical side, I'm just going to talk about what types of samples we can collect, how we can collect them, and the chain of custody to ensure that they're not tampered with and they come from the correct person. So we're going to start talking about head hair. We would always recommend that this is the best type of sample for your client to provide for drug testing, because it can provide a much more specific time frame than some of the other options, but it will depend on the length of your client's hair, which we'll come on to. Hair testing, head hair drug testing, we are looking for persistent drug misusers. So we're not looking for one-off use, although we do have alternative methods if that is what you are looking to find out from the sample. This would be to identify people who are persistent drug misusers. The window of detection we can provide is we can look back up to 12 months. But like I just mentioned, it is based on the sample that your client is able to provide. And this is something we would always ask you to consider when instructing a case. Does your client have a sufficient sample for the time frame that you're looking to test? And if not, what are the alternatives? So we know that head hair grows at an average rate of 1 centimetre a month. And this is how we define what length of time we're able to test your client for. So for example, if it was myself being tested, I have long hair, so I would be able to go back up to 12 months because you would get 12 centimeters of head hair from me. And if you had a client with shorter head hair, then it would be based on the length of the sample that they provide. So for example, if your client had 3 centimeters of head hair, we would only be able to look back up to 3 months. And that's where you may consider an alternative method of testing using a different type of sample if you need to look back further than your client's head hair will allow. If you are proceeding to test with head hair, there are 2 options available to you. You can either have an overview of the time frame, or you can have it segmented month by month. If we take a look first at the overview, this would be looking at the hair sample in larger time frame chunks, so to speak. So you can see the graph on your screen now. This is a sample of hair that would cover potentially up to 12 months, being 12 centimeters in length. However, if you instructed us to test this and you wanted it as an overview, we would provide 3 results, 1 for each segment of 3 months. So it's kind of looking at the timeframes as a larger picture rather than that specific month by month breakdown. And this depends on exactly what you're looking for from the sample. If you knew what the result was going to be, for example, your client said that they were completely negative, they'd never used the drug, it was just something that the court had ordered and they were complying with, an overview may be the option for them because you know it's a negative result and you don't need that month by month breakdown. A segmented analysis using the same graph breaks each result down month by month. So you would get 12 readings for this segment of hair because it measures 12 centimeters. And each result, would represent 1 month. This is a great tool to use if you're looking for patterns or trends in your client's hair. So for instance, if your client was previously a heavy user and said they'd either reduced their use or abstained, you could look back at the pattern to see whether that was reflective in the sample that we'd collected. So we always recommend this type of test if you're unsure of what the results may be or you're looking to ascertain those patterns and trends within the client's hair sample. This is just a table that shows you what your options are, just to summarize. So if you did have a client with 3 centimeters of head hair, or that was the length of time you wanted to test, the report time for both an overview and segmented would be 3 months. However, the overview would be 1 result for that 3-month period as a whole, and the segmented would be 3 individual results, 1 representing each month of the test. And then it's the same if you looked back for 6 centimeters, you would either get 2 results, 1 representing each 3-monthly period, or 6 individual results, 1 for each month, to show those patterns and trends. So we've spoken about head hair, and that is the ideal situation. If your client has sufficient head hair for testing, we would always recommend that that's the method you choose. However, there are cases where your client may not have sufficient head hair, or they may refuse to provide head hair, and you're looking to seek an alternative method. So there's a few options to choose from. The first one would be a body hair sample, and we can take this from most places. So for drug testing, we can do underarm, chest, leg, forearm, back, wherever your client has the most hair available. And if we were to collect a sample of body hair, it would be looking back up to 12 months as an overview. So we cannot break body hair down and segment it month by month. It would be 1 result for that 12-month period as a whole. So again, it's just to consider whether that would provide the information that you're looking for and give an idea of use if that's the alternative method. Another option is beard hair. Now, beard hair does depend upon the length of the sample we're able to collect from your client. So if you are doing beard hair, we would apply a time frame to it, which is potentially up to 12 months, but it is dependent on the length. So once it's received in the laboratory, we would apply a growth rate to it, and then we'd be able to advise on how far back we're able to report on. Then you've got toenail samples, which look back up to 12 months as an overview, and then fingernail samples, which can offer 6 months as an overview. But we'd always recommend, if you are unsure of which method would be best, please get in contact with us. We can advise you on it, and we can take a look at your court order and see if we can offer alternatives based on what the request is. Alternative methods. So we spoke before about how we're looking back large periods of time, so up to 12 months. But there are some options you can use if you're looking at shorter time frames. So these are usually requested for things like at contact sessions, if you're wanting to check that someone's not under the influence. So the first option is oral fluid testing. And this looks back up to 48 hours. So it's just testing very short term. And it looks for the six common drugs that we see. So cocaine, cannabis, amphetamines, methamphetamines, opiates, and benzodiazepines. So they would be the 6 drugs we would test for, reporting back approximately 48 hours from the time the sample was collected. For a little bit of a further back look, but not by much, you've got urine testing. So that goes back up to 4 days. For cannabis users who are historic users, it can still be detected in the urine for up to 28 days. So that is something to bear in mind if you're looking at these options. And the urine test is up to 9 drugs, so the standard 9 panel. And that goes off to the laboratory and provides that 4-day window from when the sample is collected. So speaking of sample collections, what are the options for it? So we have a team of phlebotomists, sample collectors who travel all over the UK to collect samples. Happy to attend home addresses if that's more suited to your client. We can attend your offices and meet the client there. We can attend contact centres. It's up to you, whatever works best for your client, as long as we're able to collect the sample in a safe and sanitary environment, we're happy to attend. And again, it's something we can discuss when you're setting up your case as to where that would suit your client. If you don't want us to attend a home address, or maybe your client doesn't live near to your offices and that's not an option, we do have 13 walk-in clinics based all over the UK, where once you've registered your case, your client is welcome to attend and we'll collect the sample there for them. So there's a few options when it comes to sample collection, and it's based on what's best for you and your client. When we are collecting a sample, we have to maintain the chain of custody. We need to be sure that the sample was collected correctly from the right person, that it was packaged correctly, that it was submitted to the laboratory, and then tracing it at all stages right through until the reporting. When your client attends for a sample collection, we will take a photograph of them so that we can prove who attended the appointment, and that is then printed within the report, which Marie will talk about shortly. We do ask that photographic identification is provided where possible. However, we do understand that that's not always possible, so we have that photograph as well to back up who attended for the appointment. The samples are then sent off by the collector to the laboratory and they're tracked all the way. And then we can follow that through the lab using a tamper tape number that's placed on the envelopes at the appointment, all the way through until the reporting stage. So this is a summary table of the different types of sample we've spoken about. Hopefully this will help when you are instructing cases to make the best decision for your client, getting as close to the request as possible. Like we said, head hair is by far and away the best option. It can be more specific when segmented, so we can look at established historical patterns. However, if that's not an option, you've got your body hair for up to 12 months, your beard hair dependent on the length for up to 12 months, nails, either toenails or fingernails. And then if you are looking at that shorter window, maybe more regular testing for a client, then you've got your urine or your oral fluid options. And then finally, just to finish, what we ask you to do before you instruct is to consider what you're looking to get out of the testing, and this will help you make the best decision on what suits your client and the court order as well. So we need you to consider a few different things. So why the test is being done and what you're looking to find out. If you're only looking at short-term use, then body hair would not be the option for you because that's going to go back up to 12 months. We may look to collect a head hair sample and just test back a month or 2. What period of detection you wish to cover. So if you are wanting to do, for example, a 6-month test, but your client doesn't have sufficient head hair, we would look at taking a fingernail sample because that's what's going to get us closest to the time frame that you're after. And then also considering how your test is going to be funded, so that you can make the best decision, especially if your client is paying for a percentage of the test. We can inform them on the cost difference between the different tests as well. So like I said before, get in touch. speak with one of our advisors, find out what is the best option for you, what suits you, what will give you the most suitable test for the court order and the time frame that you need to cover. So I'm going to hand over to Marie now, who'll talk you through how to interpret your court-approved drug test report.
Good morning, thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to be going over the general aspects covered in hair testing, so collection and storage, decontamination, segmentation, extraction, analytical techniques, and the interpretation of the results. Thank you. So following the receipt of the head hair at the sample in the laboratory, after all the chain of custody details have been checked, it goes in for the required segmentation. So it could be an overview or 1 centimetre segmentation. So the sample is prepared by being segmented into the required lengths. That is then decontaminated by washing, and that removes anything that's on the surface of the hair that could interfere with the testing. Then we basically homogenize the sample, so that is made smaller, so we're getting a representative sample to be extracted and purified. So what that does is releases any drugs and metabolites that are within the hair shafts. Then we go for confirmation technique, and what we're doing there is we're identifying and quantifying the levels of any drugs and analytes that are interested in this case, and that's used chromatographic methods. Sorry, I've got a sore throat today, and with mass spectrometry. And then when we get the results of those, we have a specific set of cutoffs. So we use a Society of Hair Testing cutoffs to actually determine chronic drug use. So where provided, we use the interpretation of the Society of Hair Testing cutoffs. And if they're not provided due to insufficient data, then we use laboratory cutoffs for the reporting and interpretation. So the on-site toxicologists analyse the samples, and then the reporting scientists will report the results. There's 2 methods that we can report the results for you, and that's the standard, which is a certificate of analysis, and that will have a list of all the drugs that you've requested, and the drug screen plus as well. So if anything's been identified at your request, and that will be on a certificate with the levels detected. The enhanced way of reporting will be in a statement of witness, and that covers everything that's required for the court. So it would detail all the chain of custody, the identification, all of the information that's required is within that statement. So it's an impartial interpretation of the analytical results. We're all highly trained scientists. We look at the levels that are there, we look at the disclosures, and we'll do an interpretation of what the results, what we determine the results are. So they should be easy to understand and clear and concise, and should basically tell you what you need to know. And they're provided and comply with the family procedural results. So this is basically the first page of the statement of witness. And the first thing you'll see is a summary of the results. So this isn't an interpretation. This will tell you what has been detected or not detected in the hair. So in this case, the hair samples tested positive for cannabis, cocaine, and MDMA. So there's no interpretation there, but it's just a quick summary for you to see on the first page. So then we go into the donor and sample information. So we have the date of birth, the collection date, the receipt date, the name of the sample collector, and then the chain of custody. That will always be intact and complete on a statement of witness or certificate of analysis. Otherwise, we're unable to provide one if the chain of custody is not intact and complete. And then we detail the donor identification. So we'll point you to where the photograph will be, which is in the rear of the report, and then also any photographic identification that's presented at the time of the collection. And in there, we'll detail the passport or driving license, citizen card, and then the number that will be on that document. So then we go to the request that you have put into AlphaBiolabs. So in this case, scalp hair was requested and scalp hair was analysed. If there's any deviations from that, that will be detailed in the sample type analysed and the reason for that deviation. But you would have already been made aware of this upfront as soon as the sample is received at the laboratory and you're authorised for the testing to proceed. Then we go into the length of the hair sample that's come into the laboratory. So In this case, it's 4 centimetres, and it's required for cannabis and cocaine. So we've gone 4 months segmented, and in this case, the hair required actually does cover that testing. And then in this case, we've also got drug screen plus analysis that has been requested. So the hair was also screened for the other 12 the other groups. So in this case, we test for 12. So you've requested the 2, and the other 10 drugs are also go through the confirmatory analysis. And in this case, MDMA was also detected in the hair. So then we go to the sample donor disclosures. So in this case, we detail medication and any illicit drug use. In this case, no medication was detailed. If there's numerous medications detailed, we separate those into two separate bullet points. Anything that will be not interfere with the testing, and then anything that is a disclosed medication, such as diazepam, codeine, dihydrocodeine, that would be detected by the testing. And using Drug Screen Plus, if it's a declared medication, such as codeine, dihydrocodeine, and diazepam, and it's detected, we don't report it in the report because it would be expected to be there. But if it's not disclosed, it will be reported as part of the Drug Screen Plus service. Then we go into the environmental exposure declaration. So whether or not they're knowingly exposed to any drugs. So if they're around people that use drugs, or passing in areas where they think there's regular and repeated drug use, and then also whether or not they have close body contact with a drug user. And then very importantly in hair testing, hair treatments and products. Any treatment to the hair shafts that adds pigment or removes pigment from the hair also damages the hair shaft at the same time. So the cuticle has to be lifted to add the pigment or remove it. And that damage to the hair shaft, to the cuticle, can also remove any drugs and metabolites that are within the hair at the time, therefore decreasing anything that's present. And hair products, we detail those just for full disclosure. So this then is where we cover the time periods and the segmentation of the sample. So in this case, the hair sample was 4 centimetres in length. The hair will always be denser at the scalp end of the hair sample and taper towards the lengths as the hairs get shorter through damage or through cutting. So in this case, both the A and B samples are required because the hair sample only measured 4 centimetres to make the weight for the end for the segments that are further from the scalp. So the detailed segment 1 to 4, with 4 being furthest from the scalp. Then we apply an approximate time period, but this is for guidance only. Hair growth rates do vary seasonally between individuals, age, and so many factors, androgenetic alopecia. So these time periods are based on an approximate 1 centimetre per month growth rate, and should always be taken with a caution, because it is just for guidance only, and it's mainly to show with segmentation any changes in use. So here we have the results, and as we've also identified MDMA using the Drug Screen Plus service, this is also detailed in the table. We don't detail the negative results for the other Drug Screen Plus analytes because they weren't requested, and they're negative, so they're not going to have any interpretation on those. So in this case, we've got MDMA as well as cannabis and cocaine. And in the final column, you can see that there's a range. The MDMA levels are in the high range and the cannabinoids are in the medium range. That does not equate to a level of use because there's so many factors that affect the levels that are detected in the hair. So it's to do with the statistical interpretation against all of the positive hair samples that we've tested at AlphaBiolabs. So it's quartile ranges. So the low range is up to 25, the lowest 25%. The high range is the highest 25%. So from 75% to 100% in the statistical analysis. So it's just to do with the levels in comparison to what we normally see typically within the laboratory. Thank you. So then we go into the technical information. So every drug that we report in the table will have an explanation. So that will talk about its classification and anything, its metabolites that are also there. Then we have an explanation of each hair sample type being reported on. So if you've got scalp hair, it would talk about generally about scalp hair, but then if there's also body hair tested, we have a little section on that as well to explain the main differences between body hair and head hair. Then we talk about drug incorporation into hair, the range of drugs detected, which is that talks about the levels that are in the table, and then external exposure washers, and then residual positive results after abstinence, which is very important if somebody has changed their drug taking behavior or recently stopped using drugs. That is always taken into the interpretation. So then we go into further technical information, and then the effect of cosmetic hair treatments. As I stated earlier, the hair shafts are damaged by hair dyes and by chemical lightening, so bleaching or highlights. And so that is also taken into effect. So if we're looking for dye lines, we're looking for colour changes on the hair, they will always be mentioned in the conclusion. The effect of thermal hair straightening, that can, due to the heat used with thermal hair straighteners, it can damage the hair shafts just as much as the chemical hair treatment can, but also change the ratios of drugs and metabolites. Then we have the cut-off information. So as I stated earlier, we have cut-offs that are provided by the Society of Hair Testing. They were recently updated in 2021, and we also have laboratory cut-offs. So if we're not provided with a cut-off, we use a laboratory cut-off, and that is stated clearly in the table. And then a detected result, which is a level that's detected above the cut-off, and then a not detected negative result could be a level below the cut-off or completely negative. And then we get drug concentrations above our calibration range. As a new implementation by UCAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, we are no longer permitted to report concentrations that are above our highest standard when we're using hair testing. So with that, you'll get a greater than symbol. And that just means that we can't give an accurate calibrated result, and it's determined from a linearity scale. So that will always say greater than if it's above our calibration range within the hair. So the reporting of the result, the conclusions. So we'll discuss what's been detected and what that means, and then any effect of any hair treatments, or if something's been noted by the scientist on the photograph, or if an individual has alopecia, androgenetic alopecia, that will also be taken into consideration, and just highlighted to you that the time periods could be slightly different, more different from normal. Then we have the disclosures, which are required for the court. Sample donor identification, that will be the photo taken at the collection. And then we go into the qualifications and experiences of the scientists writing the report. So you will see their education and their level of experience. Then we have the declarations and peer review. So the peer review is also a second scientist has read the report, read the conclusion, an interpretation, and also agreed it. So that will be there for you to know that that interpretation has been agreed by two senior scientists. And then we have the references. So that is the information that we use to base our interpretations on, and that's all detailed there. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Marie, and Ashley as well. Okay, so now we move into our Q&A session. If you do have any questions, then please put them in the Q&A facility on Zoom. I've had a few coming in, so I'm just going to start a couple of questions for Ashley, really, around collections. The first one, if my client refuses to provide a head hair sample or doesn't have enough head hair, will you take an alternative, or will I need to book another appointment?
So there's two options for this. When you complete your referral form, you will select the sample that you would like us to collect. So for instance, head hair. There is a separate box that states if insufficient, and then you can give us some options. So you can ask us to take an alternative sample. You can ask us to take whatever head hair is available. So for instance, if you want 6 months, but the hair is only 4 centimeters, we can still take it. Or you can ask us to abandon the collection and then seek more advice from yourselves. So you can pick any one of those. If you don't select them, because it's not a mandatory box, we will discuss with your client what they're willing to provide, and then we will collect that sample and offer you that before we proceed with any testing. And that's the important part. If we can't get your original request, we will always contact you and offer the alternative that was taken. So it would only be in situations where you specifically asked us not to take anything else, including the head hair that was available, where we would abandon it and you would need to rebook. Other than that, we'd discuss it with the donor or yourselves and act on what you'd filled in on your referral form.
That's great. Thanks, Ashley. And one more for you, quite an interesting one, this. Can you take samples from somebody in a prison?
Yeah, you can, definitely. It's a little bit of a longer process than it would be if they weren't in prison. We have to apply to take certain items in with us. So obviously we need the scissors that we take the samples with and things like that. So we have to apply to take them in on the next legal visit. Usually takes about a week, maybe 2 maximum, for that to all go through and for us to be in the prison. The only difference from a home collection is that we're not allowed to take our phones in or electronics. So we can't actually take a photograph of your client. However, there are 2 options. We can either get the prison to print off a photograph. Sometimes they'll do that for us. Or if not, we get a security guard or a prison guard to sign the form to state that they have correctly identified the prisoner. So yeah, absolutely. Just need to allow a little bit more time for it than you would for a normal collection.
Great, thanks, Ashley. Okay, there's a couple more, probably for yourself, Marie. The first one is, why can't body hair be segmented?
Due to the way body hair grows, it doesn't grow to the same length as terminal hair on the scalp. So it's once it meets its maximum length, it basically remains in situ on the body. So its resting phase is much longer. So segmental analysis is to show a change in patterns in use. So because so much more body hair is actually in the resting phase, you can't show any pattern of use by segmentation, because that hair could have been there for months and months and months prior to the collection. So you can't really show any changes in use by segmentation.
Great, thank you. Another one that's just come in, it's quite a long question, this one. When you say that high does not necessarily mean high usage, but high compared to your database of those tested, does that not mean that if someone uses a new drug, it could come up as high if not detected before when only being used once? Would it not be best to say whether there has been excessive use of that drug?
Because of our standard panel, we've got thousands and thousands of results. So in our standard panel of 12, which is the one used in Drug Screen Plus, the data has been collected over years and years. So with new drugs, we don't really cover them in that standard panel. So that data is 12, 15,000 positive results, for some of the drugs and analytes and higher for others. So with a new one, you wouldn't necessarily put a level if there's insufficient data, because you can't make a comparison. But with our standard 12 panel, it isn't the case.
That's great, thanks, Marie. Got time for one more that's come in. It's probably for yourself as well, Marie. How do you analyse and report on a case where drug use is denied, results are positive, and donor states it is the result of passive exposure?
Well, there's a number of steps that I talked about earlier on. Basically, the decontamination step. So there's a number of steps that we take within the laboratory that actually a requirement to get a positive result. So it's the decontamination, the detection of drugs, drug metabolites, and above the Society of Hair Testing cutoff limits. So anyone that's passively exposed to any drugs should not be detected after each of those 3 steps has been carried out, because those steps are there to prevent somebody that's been passively exposed to a drug to actually have enough in the hair to be incorporated above the level that is actually seen in someone that's regularly and repeatedly using a drug. So passive exposure from my experience, is not going to cause a positive hair test result. If the only one that really comes into it is cocaine. If somebody regularly has powder cocaine on their hands and it's transferred to the hair, you won't see the metabolites. So that's where the detection of metabolites comes into it. So if you're detecting cocaine, you're detecting two of its metabolites, benzoylecgonine and norcocaine, which is a very minor metabolite. And then also we have a further metabolite, which is only created when alcohol and cocaine are in the body at the same time. When you're detecting those, the cocaine has definitely been metabolized within the body to be detected above the reporting cutoff levels for regular and repeated drug use. So that's why we have the steps in the decontamination, the detection of the drug metabolites, and then the use of cutoffs.
That's great. Thanks very much, Marie. Okay, so that's all the questions that have been asked, have all been answered. So just to finish off, really. So why choose AlphaBiolabs? As Ashley mentioned, sample collection available from any UK address. We can also do free collections from any one of our UK walk-in centres. And drug test results are issued within 7 working days of the sample being received into our laboratory. User-friendly reports, as Marie's been talking about, and we also provide you with dedicated account and case managers. From an accreditation point of view, with UCAS, we are ISO 17025 and ISO 9001. We've also got a special promotion on at the moment, so we're offering 15% off drug testing off our standard price until the 30th of April. In order to qualify for that discount, you just need to quote the code DRUG15 when you make a quotation request to us. You can do that by phone or by email, or alternatively, if you visit our website, alphabiolabs.com, you can complete the online form there and our sales team will send you back a quotation. So all that's left for me to say really is thank you very much for your time this morning. Please do just spend another minute before you log off to complete the webinar survey, which will appear on your screen in a moment. As I said at the start of the webinar, your feedback is really useful for us in terms of future planning of these webinars. So please do get in touch with us. We are the experts in legal DNA, drug and alcohol testing. We're also on social media. So if you're on LinkedIn or Twitter, please do look us up on there and give us a follow and we'll give you a follow back. Thanks very much to our presenters today, to Ashley and Marie, and thanks once again to all of you for your time this morning. Have a great day ahead, and we look forward to seeing you again soon on the next round of AlphaBiolabs webinars. Thanks very much and goodbye.